Would like to apologize for the changes in the hall. Probably there has been some confusion. However, we have been delayed enough, so we might as well start. The theme of this session is one of the most significant themes, particularly in the conditions experienced by the region, particularly in light of the reduction of oil prices and its political and economic impacts. Therefore, the matter or the issue of oil has been discussed in other sessions. However, we shall extensively address this issue in this session. Our speakers, my old friend Naji Abi-Aad, and he's currently the natural gas in the GCC, and he's the CEO of the Lebanon Gas Corporation, and hopefully it's an oil company in Beirut. He also in the past had worked in Qatar at the office of the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy and Industry. Also a senior position as the CEO advisor at Qatar Petroleum. Mr. Naji has taught in the American University, and I believe he still teaches at the American University. He's a holder of a PhD in economy from France. And throughout his professional career has a long experience and has written many articles and reports in this regard. He has also authored a book on the power supplies or energy supplies in the region. Let me introduce the rest of the speakers. Our second speaker is Mr. Ahmed Saddam. He's an academic who lectures at Al-Basra University. Previously, he worked at the Al-Basra and the Arab Gulf Studies Center, and a PhD holder in international trade from Malaya University in Kuala Lumpur. Our third speaker is Paul Stevens. Is a very distinguished colleague at Chatham House, the Royal Society in London. He taught in the American University in Beirut, and then he moved to University of Surrey up to 79, and then he taught the chairmanship of the laws of energy, minerals, and its politics at Dundee University in Scotland. Since 1993 till 2008, he won the OPEC Award for his distinguished works in the oil and energy research. We shall start with Mr. Naji Abi-Aad. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to present his paper. Thank you, Mr. Chair. May peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. On the onset, I would like to talk about natural gas, particularly after we had enjoyed our lunch. Our heads may not be as clear. My presentation is going to be in English. However, any discussion that would take place, it would be in Arabic language. However, I have prepared my presentation in English.
I will not go through the outline of the presentation. but I will go directly to talk about the position of the GCC in the global gas market. We all know that the GCC played an important role in exporting natural gas to the world market, but it recently started to play an increasing role as a gas consuming market and importing market as well. In fact, so much LNG has been exported from the region, especially from Qatar, after being exported or still being exported from Abu Dhabi, Oman, and even Yemen, which is not a GCC. But in the same time, many countries in the region have started to import gas, both in its piped form or in liquefied form as LNG. In fact, we have different gas strategies in the Gulf. We can use it domestically in order to release more crude and petroleum products for export. We can make use of gas for building and developing petrochemicals and fertilizer industrial base. We can use it locally to moderate the growing dependence on petroleum products and therefore minimizing the fuel imports, or to enhance the gas production in order to increase the export share in the global energy market. This is the Qatari strategy, if you want. We have in the Gulf huge proven gas reserves. It was estimated by BP World Energy Statistics in June this year at around 42,000 billion cubic meters, or BCM. And this represents around 23% of the world total, while the region population represents less than 2% of the world's. But we have to say and stress on the fact that reserves in the region differ widely from one country to the other, and also in the form of these gas reserves. This is an important fact that we have to mention. In fact, all Gulf countries, with the exception of Qatar, have most of their proven reserves in associated form, and they are found and eventually produced together with crude oil. What is the difference between associated and non-associated is that when you have non-associated gas, like 99% of the Qatari gas, you can produce them at will, only when you have market for them. But when you have associated gas with oil, then you cannot produce that gas without producing oil. And in this case, your production capacity is limited because your oil capacity is limited, either by OPEC quota or by technical capabilities as well. This table shows a little bit the figures for every country. As we can see, Qatar got the largest share with 24,700 BCM. And what is important for Qatar is that 99% of its gas reserves are in non-associated forms, and they are found in the largest non-associated gas fields in the world, which is the North Field, Haql al-Shamal. We noticed that Saudi Arabia got plenty of gas, 8,200 BCM, which is even more than almost eight times or 9 times the size of Oman, although Oman is exporting, but Saudi Arabia is in bad need of gas. Why? Mostly because the gas in Saudi Arabia and in Kuwait as well, most of their gas is in associated forms. They cannot produce it at will. And while gas demand is increasing, gas production cannot match with the gas demand because of this fact. We have also to say that most of the non-associated gas in some countries, like in Saudi Arabia, which has also some non-associated gas, are located in dispersed small fields or in overpressured hoof formation, which are highly corrosive and very deep, and therefore highly expensive to develop. This leaves in the Gulf only Qatar to be able or to have the capacity of exporting gas. Back to the total of the Gulf, in 2013, if we divided the reserves over production, we have a ratio which is the RP ratio covering 111 years of RP, of reserves to production ratio, compared to an average of 55 years worldwide. And we have to say that the GCC proven reserves alone are sufficient if no further discovery are made to satisfy the global gas consumption for some 12 years. Good. What about gas production and demand? The bulk of natural gas production is consumed locally in the Gulf. This is a fact that nobody knows except the people living in the, or working in the industry. Not everything is exported. Most of the gas produced in the Gulf is consumed locally, and at a high growth rate even. We have so many factors that have contributed to the increased gas consumption in the region, and they are to gather momentum and to continue in the coming years. In the Gulf countries with modest gas reserves, or where such reserves and output are in associated form, and where crude oil production and the subsequent output of associated gas are not anticipated to grow in the foreseeable future at the same rate as domestic gas demand, growing gas deficits are taking place. This is the case of Kuwait, this is the case of Saudi Arabia, this is the case of Dubai, and this is why these countries are importing gas in piped form or in LNG. This is what we just said. But before talking about pipelines and this integral regional integration, why not using oil when we have so much oil? Why we have to use gas? Especially that the region itself got 29% of the world oil reserves, proven oil reserves. And every country in the region got plenty of oil. We have so many reasons for this. First, we cannot use oil and oil products at will, especially that we have to take into consideration the environmental factors. We have to really start looking at the environmental issues when everybody is looking at it. We have also to know that OPEC quota is based on oil production and not on oil export. That means that everything we consumed locally is part of the OPEC quota. That means that everything we consumed locally is decreasing our OPEC quota. And this is a costly fact, especially at a high oil prices. Surely, if we use more and more oil, we are losing more and more export revenues. Also, if we only use oil, then we use gas, we are saving new refineries, the cost of new refineries, and keep the safe products for export. Finally, there is a need for using gas because the gas is more suitable for some export, for some industrial applications, especially for petrochemical and fertilizers, and it is more suitable for generating power. And for using gas for generating power is highly efficient, more efficient than using oil and oil products. Okay, then some countries in the Gulf are in bad deficit of gas, and they are importing gas through regional pipeline. And we had some pipelines in the region, and we thought that these pipelines will be the precursor of establishing the GCC gas grid, which was on the table since 1982, actually. Such network will be extremely important for the region, for economically and politically. I'm trying to be a little bit quick because of the time, but we only had few interstate gas pipeline in the region. We had only a short-lived Iraq-Kuwaiti gas pipeline. It was built in 83 and it stopped in 90. Then it was used at one time to bring some oil, some water from Iraq. And after the Iraq-Kuwaiti war, we had some rumors talking about the possibility of reopening this pipeline, but nothing happened till now. We had a gas link between Oman and Ras Al Khaimah, a small one, but we have especially the most important one is the Dolphin pipeline between Qatar and Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Suhar in Oman. But why we had only few pipelines in the region? First, we have two issues. We have so many problematic issues for pipeline. One of them is the swing demand between summer and winter. We know that in summer gas demand is almost double the demand in winter. And here we have to find a solution of where to put or how to use the capacity, the spare capacity of a pipeline from the upstream and the downstream. Who will pay the cost for this? And then we have to see which price we have to agree on this gas. At a time when gas and all oil products in the Gulf are extremely highly subsidized. What we do, if we, in Saudi Arabia, we are paying 75 cents per million BTU, how we can import gas from Qatar at $7 or $8 per million BTU? And this is only an example how difficult it is to find an attractive price for this traded gas. Then we have the transit fees. Transit fees, especially if the pipeline is transiting a third country. And these transit fees are adding to the economic cost of a pipeline. Another issue which stopped basically a pipeline, for example, between Qatar and Kuwait. A project was to be built between Qatar and Kuwait, and it has to pass by the territorial water of Saudi Arabia. In addition to the question of price, in addition to the question of political problems between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia at that time, we had another problem, is that according to the WTO, every member country in the World Trade Organization, if it allows another country to let a pipeline pass it by its territory, it has to open its local market for the products pumped in this pipeline. And this is what the Saudis didn't want to do at that time. These are small factors that really affect the whole things. And finally, we have the energy independence and self-sufficiency. Every country in the Gulf is very proud of its oil and gas reserves, and they find it difficult, really difficult, to import from their neighbors or from other places. Now, the prospects of considering new pipelines in the Gulf is really diminishing. Why? Because most of these countries in bad need of gas, they already built liquefaction or, regasification plant to import liquefied natural gas, LNG. And we started with Kuwait. Imagine that Kuwait, which was negotiating with Qatar to get piped gas from Qatar, because this plan was not successful, Kuwait built an LNG terminal, and they import LNG first from Russia. Then we had Dubai, also, which built another LNG terminal. Now we have Fujairah, the Emirates LNG project. We have Bahrain, which are extremely serious in building this kind of terminal. And we have even Oman, which is importing gas from Dolphin while exporting LNG, but gas reserves there are really modest and they cannot afford a long-term export policy. Saudi Arabia even at one time was considering putting together an LNG import terminal. Why the LNG option was encouraged? For so many reasons. First, you are free to bring gas from any place in the world if you have the right price and the right volume. Second, you have really competitive cost and price for building the different parts of the LNG chain. Then also, LNG will help you to diversify your energy sources. And this is important in the energy policy for every country. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket. And then you have also to rely, you can rely on LNG as a way to enhance the security of gas supply. You cannot have a secure gas supply only by pipeline, because a pipeline, by definition, can be cut at any time. And finally, there is a perception that LNG prices, because of the LNG expected oversupply worldwide, will go down, and this will add to the economics of using LNG. This leads me to the conclusion saying that, Naya, we will have an oversupply of LNG worldwide. Then why not, especially for the LNG Gulf supplier or exporter, they will have difficulties to market their LNG worldwide. This will maybe push them more and more to reorient their LNG for the Gulf itself. Then hopefully, with the situation of the global gas market and the global LNG market, slowly, this Gulf gas, which was to be exported in the global gas markets, will be reoriented and will supply again the region itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Naji. The next speaker, Dr. Ahmed Saddam Shbaib, who will speak to us about the challenges of energy and its consumption in the GCC and in a dynamic analysis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Peace be upon you all. The paper at hand is entitled Dynamic Analysis of Energy Production and its Aggregate Consumption in GCC Countries. أدلة من خلال نماذج متعددة. He is repeating that in Arabic now. As it is known, GCC, because of the tremendous oil energy it has become consuming countries as well of crude oil, and this is mainly due to the oil projects and industries linked to it, especially refineries and petrochemicals and projects linked thereof, where the consumption level of the crude oil is 100,000 barrels a day. In April 1997, before the GCC countries organization was established, the Gulf countries then were main exporting countries of gas, natural gas, and the Emirates was the main exporter of liquefied natural gas, LNG, where it has exported to Japan and other countries. In August 2009, GCC countries started importing natural gas from outside, with the exception of Qatar, of course. Also, the same source shows that the GCC countries or the crisis of natural gas will be more evident in 2015. Here is the theoretical framework of the study, why there is decline in natural gas. First of all, the rise of the income per capita vis-a-vis decline in the level of prices. These two factors contributed to the rise of the consumption of energy level or gas home use by 47% of the overall consumption, and this is a large rate if to be compared with the consumption in the world in terms of home use. In the world, it is 25%. And this is the first cause of the decrease of energy in gas, specifically, or natural gas. The second factor is the Gulf countries' policies, which encourage the consumption of gas, especially the subsidies policy, which is in the form of tax exemptions, etc. All these together have contributed to the growth of the level of consuming electricity, and this is sometimes 90% reliant on natural gas as a main tributary of generating electricity. Data shows that the level of need to generate electricity in the GCC countries altogether will increase by 50% in 2030. This is, of course, a big challenge. Some of those countries should revisit its policies in terms of oil or gas, especially the subsidies policy, which encourages consumption. The third factor, the production energy, which is really big in the oil wells, and it is, as it is known, all these wells, and after a while, they go through injection of natural gas, and this increase of the energy dictates for an increase to inject gas in those fields. In 1998, natural gas needed for injection is almost 18 billion cubic meter, and it is expected that this will rise to 45 billion cubic meters in 2020. Through this theoretical framework, we see clearly that the main reasons, 1 and 2, are because of the nature of consumerism in those countries. And what increases consumption is the subsidies policies, which lead to those factors, and also the tax exemptions. All of these have contributed to the rise of demand on gas with the decline of production levels of late. Also, previous studies suggest in this topic that most studies have focused on the role of natural gas or energy in general and its link to the economy at large. هذا دورك. And the studies have shown that it is natural to have a positive relationship between energy and the economy. In this study, we will try to analyze the level of consumption of energy and its production between the economic sectors away from the overall economy and the fluctuations which those economies face. It is an attempt by the researcher, therefore, to identify or add something new to the previous studies. Some studies have put scenarios for the GCC countries. Those scenarios are, in brief, the possibility of importing natural gas from North American countries because they have ample of natural gas. This is in the short term. In the long term, studies encourage the attraction of foreign companies to invest in gas or increasing the investment because there are investments already. Another study suggested the paradigm of large-scale optimization model, which is based on having an integrated project between the GCC countries based on production of natural gas in the best ways, which will decrease the cost of production.
Shale.
Most studies have emphasized this positive relationship, but they all agree, as it is in the current study, that the energy sector is linked to the prevalent economic paradigms and the policies in the economy, and this is the main important issue here, in addition to the fact that the level of the energy that is put or offered. So I have said that already. Here, the methodology, this study has adopted the quantitative approach. Here, we used a gauging paradigm or equation. تقدرش الثالث بعد.
Okay, يلا.
This is a number of equations, and we see crude oil and natural gas and the production of electricity are variables. In the first one, we see it as a variable, and this is to analyze the relationship between the different variables, which affects which. بضربك حسن. بضربك. This is to determine the level of the data. Can it be analyzed in the stationary paradigm of data? 4 of these indices show that the data is stable, and thus the results which could be analyzed might be economically acceptable and feasible and meaningful. This also is the other example and the results obtained by the study of the 3 sectors and the consumption of each country of the GCC, 6 states. Here, how much time I have left? 5 minutes? I'll go quickly now. The first example of paradigm shows unidirectional association from natural gas and crude oil to generating electricity, and this leads, of course, to increase in the energy consumption. Economically speaking, the production of electricity is the big factor in the increasing level of consumption of energy. There is a link in the long term between those variables in terms of natural gas and crude oil. Also in Bahrain, there is a link between the three variables, but in a different way, and this is due to the nature of the data and the quantity of energy in those countries. Similarly, in Saudi Arabia, we find that crude oil is the main element in terms of energy consumption. Oman is excluded from the paradigm because of the small size of the economy, but at the same time, there is a long-term relationship to go to crude oil. In Qatar, the relationship is linked between crude oil and electricity and natural gas. In Kuwait, as it is in Saudi Arabia, but more emphasis on natural gas to crude oil is a cause of an attempt to extract natural gas or importing it or fulfill the needs. The variance decomposition analysis, which is the other way, which attempts to analyze the data, any variable, and how is it influential in the other variables. The other one, or the third one that was used, which is the impulse response function, which measures the response of any variable to the other variables in the example or the paradigm, which reflects the associated relationship. So just to use the time, I want to read to you the results. And the results which we have obtained is that the energy overall production is linked to consumption of gas and electricity and natural gas, which means that consumption of the natural gas in the GCC is very flexible, economically speaking. Any change in the consumption would lead to a big change in the level of consumption of natural gas, and that puts the decision makers before a big challenge to put a solution to the future problems, which could be due to the decrease of natural gas. The production of electricity in the GCC countries is also parallel in terms of the response of the other variables equally, but mainly the response is because of the changes in the same sector itself. فهمان كثير أنا.
لا جدا لاحظ.
These are the main conclusions. The main conclusion is that the production of natural gas in the GCC, according to the measured results in the paradigm, is more important than the crude oil, according or because of the role or the impact of the generating of electricity in the GCC and its impact on the consumption of energy overall. These are the conclusions, and I will move on now to the economic analysis. حضر حالك للتفتيت راح يفتت مخك. Generating electricity now. Generating electricity will affect negatively the production of gas according to the ongoing situation now and the adopted policies, and it will impact, therefore, the level of the natural gas and its decline, meaning the consumption level of natural gas right now will affect on the decline of the shared exported level or amount, meaning the lack of stability between supply and demand because of a high cost, because we will see variations between using the natural gas locally and exporting it. Also, the increase in the level of energy consumption, especially in natural gas. This is inevitable. And in the future, according to these results, this increase will be even bigger, and that affects the production of electricity And now, for policy implications, GCC countries should direct their policies to renewable energies and the nuclear energy, and this might decrease slightly the reliance on crude oil and the gas reserves, and it might increase the lively life of the energy and the sustainability of the energy for future generations. Also, GCC countries could decrease of the destabilization between supply and demand through more efficient use of energy and through rising the level of the prices of gas and electricity gradually. This is in a way that does not harm the income of the people, also encouraging foreign investment companies to come and invest in the natural gas sector. And the last conclusion is that for the decision makers in the GCC, they should take into consideration in investing in the gas sector and to accompany that with legislations to avoid the problem of imbalance between supply and demand in the level of energy in the future. These are the main encyclopedias used in the study. Thank you so much.
والله انك فهمان.
شكرا دكتور.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Our next speaker is Mr. Paul Stevens, who shall address the issue of the hour, which is the issue of the shale technology revolution. As you all are aware, that it's one of the key factors in bringing down the oil prices in the international market.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking the Arab Centre for the invitation and the opportunity to address you. I'd also like to congratulate the logistics team of the Arab Centre for creating a very smooth process, very professionally done. I want to talk about the shale technology revolution, but really focus on the implications of this for the GCC countries. This is my presentation outline. I want to make sure that people understand what I mean when I talk about the shale technology revolution. It's also worth spending a minute looking at the impact it had on the United States, because that impact has led to the global impacts. And then finally, I want to look at the global impacts and the implications for the GCC. There were many implications I could have chosen, but I've picked on three. One is the issue of US energy independence. The other is something that I've been calling for the last 3 years OPEC's dilemma. And then if I have time, I'll say a few words about the impact on LNG markets. So what is the shale technology revolution? To understand this, you have to understand the difference between conventional and unconventional oil and gas. Now, if you want a salutary exercise, go on to the United States Geological Survey website, and you will find there pages and pages explaining the difference between conventional and unconventional oil and gas. The problem is that it's got a lot of very big words in, most of which I don't understand. So as an economist, I tend to think much simpler and say that basically conventional oil and gas is when you drill a hole in the ground and the oil and gas flows. Unconventional gas is when you have to do something else than just drilling a hole in the ground. And that something else is extended reach horizontal drilling and multi-stage hydraulic fracturing or fracking. Now, a few words about this technology. The first is it's been around for a long time. This is not new technology. Horizontal drilling was developed in the 1930s, and fracking was first done in the United States in 1947. Also part of the story was a key role for public research funding into the basic science of this. So in the early 1980s, somebody in Washington looked at the projections for domestic gas production in the United States and scared themselves and said, if we don't do anything, we will be in serious trouble. The result of this was the US government poured millions and millions of dollars into basic research and development into low permeability operations, and then made the results of that available to the industry. An interesting reflection which some governments in the GCC might like to think about, how they actually direct some of their research funding. The impact of this on the United States has been nothing short of spectacular. The top right-hand diagram shows you where gas has come from in the United States from 2007 up to 2013. And as you can see, in 2007, it was less than 10% from shale. By the time we get to last year, it was 40%, in a very short space of time. Similarly, in terms of producing oil, again, you can see the dramatic increase in domestic oil production in the United States since 2008. If I'd have put that slide up in 2008 as a projection, I would have been certified as a lunatic that this was absolutely impossible. Everybody was expecting US domestic production to fall, and as you can see, it didn't. The danger is that people focus on the last few years and say, wow, this really has been a revolution. But in reality, this revolution has been over 30 years in the making. It's taken a long time to get to where we are now. Okay, with this in mind, let me now focus on the global impact of the revolution and the implications for the GCC. I want to start by talking a bit about US energy independence. The diagram you see here comes from the Energy Information Administration's annual energy outlook for 2013, and it's basically a projection of US dependence on imports of liquids going up to 2040. Now, as you can see, there are 5 scenarios. The reference case is the thick black line, but the 2 scenarios that are of real interest are the red and the blue lines, which both show that effectively the US is moving to a situation where imports of liquids will be close to zero. Now, if we assume that this is likely to happen, it will have enormous implications globally and for the GCC. In terms of economic consequences, it's worth remembering half the US current account deficit is energy, is imported oil. So if the US becomes energy independent, it has halved its current account deficit. This will have serious consequences for the value of the dollar. Why does this matter to the GCC? Well, consider where much of the wealth funds have got their money invested. A large proportion of it is in the form of dollars. So in a way, that is possibly a good news. Another set of issues concerns the geopolitical consequences as the US reduces its dependence on imported oil. And the sort of stories that one hears say things like, oh, well, of course, the US will lose interest in policing the sea lanes. The US is going to lose interest in what happens in the Middle East. I would suggest to you that both of those views are seriously mistaken. Superpowers police sea lanes. It's what superpowers do. So the fact that it's importing oil or not is going to be irrelevant. As for its interest in the Middle East, at the risk of starting quite a big argument, I would suggest that in most cases, US foreign policy in the Middle East has very little to do with oil. It has to do with other issues. Only on a few occasions, most obviously, I suppose 1990, was oil a driving factor of US foreign policy. Also, it's worth remembering, the oil market is one big pool. So if there is some sort of disruption in the Middle East, and the oil price is $200 a barrel in Ras Tanura, it's $200 a barrel, give or take, in Houston. So in other words, the concern is not so much a loss of physical security of supply, it is the macroeconomic consequences of oil price volatility. There are other impacts as well. One of the consequences in the US has been the reduction in the price of gas, domestic price of gas as a result of shale technology. means that coal is being pushed out from under the boiler, and the US has started to become a major coal exporter. This, of course, is also going to have knock-on effects for the trade deficit. Also, and this is particularly relevant for the GCC, the United States petrochemical industry has had a major revival in the last 4 or 5 years as a result of the fall in the domestic price of both gas and ethane. And it's quite likely that the US petrochemical industry will increasingly compete with the petrochemical industry, which is the basis of much of the development strategy in the GCC. If you're looking for a career for your children, which is going to be lucrative, may I suggest you send them to law school and suggest they specialize in WTO legal cases, because we're going to be seeing a lot of those over the course of the next 5 to 10, 15 years. That is the impact in terms of US independence. What about the impact in terms of OPEC's dilemma? This is a concept that I've been talking about now for 3 years, over 3 years. It started with the Arab uprisings, which began in Tunisia at the start of 2011. Now, one of the consequences of this is that the Arab producing governments need more revenues. They need more revenues basically to keep the kids off the streets through the provision of jobs and or subsidies. So, for example, in 2008, Saudi Arabia needed around $50 a barrel to balance the budget. Estimates now suggest around $100 a barrel. And the top right-hand diagram shows you estimates coming out of APICOR in terms of the break-even price of other OPEC members. And that's fine. They need higher oil prices, and they've been able to get higher oil prices. But there is a problem. The problem is that high oil prices lead, first of all, to demand destruction, and secondly, it leads to increasing non-OPEC supply as a result of the development of shale technology. And the bottom right-hand diagram shows you basically the projections of what will happen to tight oil or unconventional oil. And as you can see, they are rising dramatically. Indeed, in 2011, the joke amongst oil analysts was that the next member of OPEC would be North Dakota. And at the end of 2011, North Dakota was producing more oil than Qatar or Ecuador, both OPEC members. Now, you don't need a degree in economics to realize this situation is untenable. You cannot have a high price in a market which has weak demand and increasing supply. And indeed, as predicted, we've seen prices falling. And since the end of June, prices have fallen by about 38%. Since the OPEC meeting a week or so ago, it's fallen even further, and dare I say, continues to fall. In fact, virtually every hour since that meeting, the oil price, either Brent or WTI, has been falling. Let me turn now to impacts for the LNG markets. The diagram here shows you a projection. This projection was done in 2006, so not that long ago. And the projection comes from the Energy Information Administration's Energy Outlook. And basically, it's saying how much LNG imports will the US need. Now, this, remember, is done in 2006, and the red line shows you that between effectively 2005 and 2030, then there was a very large increase expected in LNG imports. To be precise, it was over 4 trillion cubic feet of LNG required. To put that in perspective for you, that is 6 Trinidad and Tobagos or 4 Indonesias. It's a lot of LNG. And of course, the result of that sort of view of the future was that a lot of people started to build a lot of LNG capacity in anticipation of putting it into the US market. That capacity is now effectively surplus to requirements, and the result of this is that LNG is now a buyer's market and is likely to continue to be a buyer's market as we go forward over the next 5 to 10 years. And so what we're going to start seeing is US LNG competing with LNG from other sources, including the Gulf. Although to what extent that is competition has a question mark against it, because really it's only Qatar that has any possible interest in increasing LNG exports, and even that looks somewhat unlikely given the current moratorium. There are, of course, question marks over whether the US will become a major LNG exporter. There are question marks over the continuation of the shale gas revolution in the United States. Two reasons for this. First of all, we are beginning to see serious environmental reaction to hydraulic fracturing of the sort that we've seen in Europe, but not really getting its act together in the United States. And the second reason is that the operators, the producers of shale gas, tend to be small to medium-sized companies who basically are so highly leveraged. In other words, they've borrowed so much money to do the shale gas. When interest rates go up, and notice I say when interest rates go up, not if interest rates go up, when they go up, an awful lot of those companies are going to be bankrupt. Now, of course, the wells are not going to go away, but the question is who is going to operate them. And there certainly will be a lot of orphaned wells around, and this is going to reinforce environmental concerns about the whole shale gas operation. There are also pressures within Washington to limit LNG exports. This is coming from two sources. First of all, the political analysts are saying, well, hang on a minute, we thought it was supposed to be a good idea to reduce imports of gas, and here we are exporting it. This doesn't make any sense. The other source is coming from the US petrochemical industry, which is saying, hey, these low gas prices are great because it's giving a boost to the industry. We're getting foreign direct investment in and creating a lot of employment. So whether the US becomes a major LNG exporter, I think is open to question. At that point, I will stop. I will leave you with some publications that you might be interested in. I'm assuming these presentations will be available. I don't expect you to read it now. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. And now I'd like to open the floor for any comments or discussions.
أرهقك يا زلمة ها؟
سريع بحكي بسرعة.
هات حسنا. لا هات. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two quick questions. Antoine Haddad from Lebanon. The first question, do the participants here expect that soon we will reach the state of complete organization and stability between the prices, which is known decoupling between the price of gas and the liquid fuels because of the adopted technologies or recently developed technologies in terms of transferring of gas and shipping of gas, etc. Second question is to Mr. Abi-Aad, who is familiar with this issue. How do the GCC countries, specifically Qatar, view the places of production which are potentially possible in terms of the Mediterranean or the African coastlines? اللوجيك تبعه so crooked, huh? Qasim Hussein from Al-Wasat newspaper in Bahrain. The question is, what is the influence on the economy of Russia? تأثير إيش؟
تأثير نعرف.
What's the influence on the Russian economy? That's the question. Mr. Naji, for the Qatar natural gas reserves until 2003-2004, 170 trillion cubic feet was the offered amount. 170 trillion cubic feet until 2003-2004 was the amount offered. Suddenly, the number has risen into almost 900 trillion, which is close to the numbers that you have put. How accurate are those numbers? The other issue is about the LNG cost versus the pipeline. What I understood from what you said is that you give an advice to manufacture the LNG, which would be better than the pipeline because it gives you flexibility to channel gas to different places. If that's what I understand, then it's strange. You have pipelines already in the Gulf, and with simple connections to Saudi would do the job, and maybe another one to Kuwait. Also, the cost, LNG production versus pumping it through the pipeline. What's the cost in terms of production? Mr. Saddam, the re-injection gas for oil production purposes, this is recirculated. It will come out again, so you don't lose it. If you have enough equipment to repump it, you don't need these large amounts.
Mr. Paul, regarding the cost of USA, I understand from you, USA is planning to convert shale gas to LNG? Did I understand correctly? Then it is not competitive with Middle East or with Qatar gas, because my understanding to produce LNG gas from shale gas, you need almost, or oil, sorry, you need $40 to $50 per barrels almost. So if you convert gas to LNG, cost will be very high. Thank you. I need some explanation. Maybe my understanding is wrong.
اسم الكريم لو سمحت.
مؤيد الخليلي.
أهلا وسهلا. تفضل.
Amr Tharwat, my question is to Mr. Paul Stevens about the shale gas. He said that the technologies of shale gas have been running from 30 years ago. What I understand that in Canada, sand oil started a long time ago. So the question is, why now there is talk that there is a revolution in shale gas? Is it because the technological developments and the rise of oil prices, or there are political dimensions in this issue? Why speak now about a revolution as if this thing has come as a surprise to people? Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Sulaiman Zouiri Farhat from the University of Mila in Algeria. Two questions. First to Mr. Paul Stevens. There are studies that show and clarify the production of oil shale is very expensive, but there is a rise of the cost, and then after a long time, it would lead to the decrease of the price. For example, in contrast to the GCC oil production, with the rise of the oil prices, so would that lead to the rise of its cost or to be equivalent? Because studies show that this cost would lead to a high rise of the price, especially of the technology. شو بحكي هذا يا زلمة؟ So, is it true that this study would lead to replacing oil in the GCC with this special kind of oil, especially that the investments of the US has provided a lot of jobs, and this is something needed in the US. Also, question to Mr. Ahmed Saddam, you said that gas is a motivation for producing oil. Studies show that gas would be an alternative to oil. In light of the decline of the reserves of the GCC countries of this kind of energy, and since there's a decline in the reserves and the production of gas for the GCC, is it possible that this would affect the production of crude oil? Thank you. طارق الشيخ, journalist from Al-Ra'i, Qatari newspaper. Question and a comment about shale revolution. I think the numbers in the media are misleading, and shale gas or shale revolution in the US is in its beginning steps now, and I think that what happened in terms of agreement within OPEC on the production levels to stay as it is was a beginning of an open war with the US in terms of the fear of the OPEC countries of the shale revolution in the US, because it is inevitable, would lead to the reduction of gas and oil prices in the world markets. And in Texas now, many small companies there speak about the revolution of shale gas as it's something that will stay, and even if the prices went below $60, which is the expected cost, but I met the chairperson of the International Gas Federation, and he stressed out to me that technologies in the US are going persistently to lower the cost of producing shale gas, and soon there will be announcements about this. But my question to Mr. Paul is, most OPEC countries and producing countries were wondering, especially here in Qatar, and questioning the behavior of American and other big companies, because they forecast for 2030 and 2040 and 2050, but in all these forecasts, even the International Energy Agency, nothing was mentioned about the shale gas revolution. So based on this, terminals were built, such as the Qatari one in Golden Pass, with a cost of 10 billion, and it has operated for a month. Then it was shut off because the American market was in a state of overcapacity. They didn't need that, and Obama announced several times in the Congress and on other occasions about the inauguration of the first shipments of gas produced from shale gas, announcing that now the US is double that of Saudi Arabia in terms of production. And these are all indices that dictate on us to ask questions. Why a company like ExxonMobil and the International Energy Agency and other companies shut down the talk about shale gas in all its forecasts, and suddenly it was shown that ExxonMobil did not say anything about shale gas while it's working in the terminals in Golden Pass. So the are the biggest producer of shale gas in the US. So what's the explanation, Mr. Stevens, of this phenomenon?
نكتفي بهذا القدر من الأسئلة وهو كبير.
We should stop the questions right now. This should be enough questions for now. We begin with Mr. Ahmed. Go ahead. Thank you indeed for everyone who has asked a question, and we also thank the chairperson of this session. I will respond first of all to Mr. Muayyad that the injection are recyclable. Yes, definitely. It is possible to be recycled, but there are continuous demands on this gas for injection, and there are forecasts of the increase of the level of gas needed for the injection processes by 45 billion cubic meters. In all cases, this is needed. There is an amount that is needed, and the injection is done. While there are international commitments before the GCC countries. So the discrepancy now, or the contradiction, is that there is a lack of natural gas or decline, while there is exporting of natural gas because of these commitments to the international community. And I think this is linked to the political relations between those countries, as energy is the main source of supporting those relations. In all cases, what's the gas needed for injection is needed in quantities even if it was recycled, but in terms of the time needed, there are amounts needed for consumption and re-injection in addition to the commitments where the GCC has to fulfill. In terms of the question of Suleiman, would gas be an alternative to oil? No. If so, if the issue was as such, then oil now is an alternative to oil, or rather, oil is an alternative to gas. The uses of both sources, yes, it could be an alternative in terms of the revenues. Now, gas resources, natural gas in Qatar, for example, is the main source of income more than what it is in the oil sector or the crude oil sector. This is briefly said. Gas is not linked to oil. Maybe in the presentation there was a confusion, which is gas is linked to oil only in terms of the need to inject so that it will be injected in the fields or wells, but it is not linked to it because of the usages of these two main sources and their features. This is briefly said. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Let me just respond point by point. The decline of the oil prices from ordinary to $50 or $60 in order to eliminate something called shale oil, hopefully. We always should pay attention that there is a technology which is very sophisticated and abreast of the developments in the developed countries. This has contributed as a technology to a great extent in decreasing or lowering the rise of providing or developing shale gas from $7 or $8 per million cubic meter to the average, which is now $2 to $3 per million. This also, we see the technology centers in the US and in the developed countries, they are working on shale oil issues in order to lower the production or the cost of the production. The question now that I put is, we lowered the oil prices to $40 per barrel, for example, to kill oil shale. How many countries of the OPEC countries and the producing countries in the GCC can tolerate $40 to $50 a barrel? That's the question that we should raise. Maybe we can tolerate that for a year or two. And then what? The question about the issue of shale gas in the US and the high cost of it, I still say to you that the average cost of producing shale gas has been lowered from 7 to 8 into 2 to 3. So this is a huge percentage. And what is important here is you raised questions is, can the US export LNG? For your information, DOE, Department of Energy in the US, has given licenses till now by 62.5 million tons of LNG to be exported, in contrast with 47 to Qatar. And it also want to raise that into what is double of Qatar. This is for your information. And there will be a beginning of production of LNG in 2015, 16 maybe million, and then it will reach to 32 million ton, which is half of Qatar's rate. For the cost, we should pay attention to something important. It's not only cost, but price. The Americans are selling you Henry Hub plus plus. Henry Hub, which is 3.5 or 4, plus reliquefaction and gasification until it reaches you. If we take LNG gas from the US and we put Henry Hub 3.5 plus plus and we send it to Japan, we can send it to $9 per million BTU. In contrast with $16 and $17 from Qatar to Japan. This all affects the market. Only the pricing of the Americans will affect the market, not to mention the market in general would be oversupplied, because not only the Americans will have new LNG, you have Australia coming up in addition to other plants. In addition to the LNG, you have competition from piped gas. Please pay attention. The Russians have signed with the Chinese to give them 36 units of gas by pipeline, and this will increase in its capacity. As oil is a big pool, also oil is the same way. So we will see gas prices will go down. In terms of the oil connections and the pipelines, you said, why do we need LNG to be sent to the GCC while we have a pipeline from here to Saudi Arabia, and that would do the trick? The small pipeline or connection is the problem itself. We're still speaking about this. So you have GCC gas grid project, which is on the table now at the GCC Secretariat from 1982 for over 32 years. So now they are losing hope. They don't talk about it anymore. Please let me continue. Also for Qatar, the reserves of Qatar, we should pay attention to the fact that, or ask any questions, any countries that have a question about the oil productions cannot manipulate the reserves. There is an industry and scrutiny. The companies, in order to say and claim that I have reserves of shale oil, these reserves must really be confirmed, verified by so many neutral firms. It is not a joke. Also, Please, I agree with you, but
Please just allow me to give you the idea and then I'll let you speak. The North Field in particular has witnessed tremendous technological work and big technological assessment. The confirmed reserves levels, the new confirmed levels took some time. Not only Qatar is working on this, the majority of major companies in the field are working on this. So the question is not that we wake up one day and we decide to produce such amount. No, it's very complicated process. Concerning our friend from Antoine, Qatar and the GCC, let's put things in its proper context. Qatar itself has 900 TCF of proven resources. And the Eastern Mediterranean has estimates of undiscovered gas resources at the eastern side of the Mediterranean of approximately 122 trillion TCF. Undiscovered gas resources for all the East Mediterranean of 122 to 902.
So, we are not sure that these undiscovered resources, we will discover them all. If we will discover them all, we will have problems in exporting them. شوف شو عم يصير مع الغاز بإسرائيل أو الغاز بقبرص. And if we will start from now exporting or exploring and developing and producing that gas, this will lead, this will necessitate at least 8 to 9 years. وبعد 8 إلى 9 سنين يخلق الله ما لا تعلمون. شكرا.
شكرا ناجي. Mr. Paul, lots of questions
yeah,
for you.
I was asked a number of questions. I'm afraid a lot of the questions I just didn't get. I think a lot got lost in translation, so if I don't address it, my apologies. There was a comment about shale gas to LNG not being competitive. That's not really relevant. Shale gas is just methane. Shale gas refers to the way it's actually produced, and in the United States now, in many parts of that country, shale gas is cheaper to produce than conventional gas, because the whole shale gas technology revolution has been a story of technological improvements, and the costs have come down very significantly. In terms of the link between oil and gas prices, this is actually quite important. It's also particularly relevant for Qatar, because even if there are no more new LNG projects, their existing contracts will have to be renewed. And what we've seen in Europe is a very definite move to break the link between gas prices and oil prices, the contractual link that exists. And in fact, now most of the gas prices in Europe are being determined by competition in hubs rather than linked to oil. The big question is, will Asia follow that example? And already some of the new LNG contracts relating to the US exports already have broken that link to a degree. And in fact, the prices are to some extent linked to Henry Hub. But the jury is still out, the extent to which the link between oil and gas prices will disappear. Why the technology suddenly kicked in and we had a shale gas revolution in the United States? I think there's a number of explanations. First of all, it took a long time to develop a learning by doing curve. The technology has been developing all of the time, and it requires a lot of wells to be drilled and a lot of wells to be fracked before you have enough information and enough shared information to actually get a cost curve that is falling. If you then add to that the fact that by 2008, the domestic gas price in the United States went to very, very high levels. That of itself explains why all of a sudden everybody was very interested in producing gas in the United States because of those high prices, plus the fact that the banks, the financial institutions, were willing to lend a great deal of money to the producers. Expensive shale oil replacing GCC oil. Of course, this is a key issue, because one of the assumptions behind the OPEC decision at the end of November was that the lower price of oil would lead to a reduction in unconventional oil production from the United States. But I fear there is a mistaken view here, and it's a confusion between two prices. One is the break-even price, and the other is what I will call the shut-in price. The break-even price is the price that investors look at when deciding whether or not to invest in new capacity to produce crude oil. Now, there's a lot of numbers being thrown around on this for the United States, but figures between $60 to $90 are quite common. But of course, that price is not the relevant price in the short to medium term. The relevant price is the shut-in price. In other words, as the price falls, what price will it have to reach before existing capacity is closed in? And that actually is the variable cost of producing the shale oil. And that is quite low. Again, we're not sure, but it's well below $40 a barrel. You ask yourself the question, if you need to get a price down to $40 before you're going to see significant reduction in US shale, how many OPEC members can survive at those sorts of prices? At that point, I'll stop.
Well, so, but many of the oil producing, exporting countries, especially in the GCC, they can draw their sovereign wealth, or probably can borrow against that, which other countries probably won't be able to do that.
If we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, then and Qatar, that's perfectly correct. There is a financial cushion there. But even a financial cushion has a limit. It's a finite amount. Can they go out and borrow? If we're in a world where oil prices are heading down towards $40, I wonder what the sort of credit rating is going to be on that. As for the rest of OPEC, they do not have much by way of financial reserves. They will be in serious trouble. Somebody asked a question about Russia and the impact on Russia. I mean, this is a classic example. It is having a disastrous effect on the Russian economy. It's having a disastrous effect on the Russian budget. And of course, Russia cannot go into the international capital markets to borrow because of sanctions. So while it's true that some of the big GCC producers will be able to survive, even they cannot survive forever at $40 to $50 a barrel.
The example of Kuwait after the invasion and liberation, they stayed quite a few years depending on withdrawing from sovereign wealth. Couldn't that be repeated? I mean, if we are talking, depends how long we are talking.
Yeah.
A few months, a few years, depends.
Yeah,
but
obviously.
probably a few months or even a year.
Yeah, probably a couple of years when you're looking at the amount of wealth that's been accumulated by Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar. But it's still a finite amount. It's not going to go on forever. And the question is, what OPEC did at the end of November was basically abrogate itself of any responsibility for controlling oil prices. Oil prices are now going to be determined in a competitive international market. The floor for that is the short-run marginal cost of producing shale oil in the US. It's going to be below $40 a barrel. Now, at some point, somebody is going to have to blink, and OPEC is probably going to have to sit down and say, we're going to have to do something about this. The problem is, by the time they do that, will it be too late? Once the genie is out of the bottle, can you get it back in?
I'd like to thank all the speakers and all the commentators for all their discussions, and I hope this was informative and useful session that sheds light on the crisis encountered by the GCC in particular and OPEC in general, as well as producers and exporters in general. Thank you, and thanks to all the researchers and speakers. Thank you.